Hi, everybody. This is Dan Gray. I'm a practicing divorce attorney, and I'm the business logic advisor for Sensei Enterprises. I'm here with my colleague,
Mike Maschke, Chief Executive Officer with Sensei Enterprises, and I'm responsible for the technical aspects and tech support of VADER Online and interfacing with the programmers to get the features and requests that you send us implemented.
All right, so for this webinar, we're going to be looking at the mixed custody guideline scenarios. Hopefully all of you know how to log in to the online program for VADER. I'm going to enter my username and my password. And that'll bring me to the home page for VADER. For this particular demonstration, we're going to start a new case. We want to have some information that's available in each of these demonstrations. So I hit my Start New Case button. The name of the file, again, that's for my internal firm use. I'm going to call this the Davidson file. Let's assume that the case is in litigation. We're going to type in the court name of the case, Davidson versus Davidson. We could give it a password if we wanted to. I'm not going to do that for purposes of this demonstration. Party 1, it defaults to wife, father, husband, or mother, or whatever else I want to type in. But for purposes of what we're doing now, I'm going to say that I'm representing Party 1, and Party 1 is the father. Party 2, I'm going to say that that is the mother, and I'm going to give this file a case number that mirrors the case number that the court gave it. I'm going to save that information. And you can see that I now have started the Davidson file. To get to the mixed custody guidelines, I'm going to click Support and Mixed Custody. And let's start off with the sole shared guideline.
So, Dan, what are the new mixed custody guidelines?
So, for years and years, the custody guidelines, or the child support guidelines rather, covered 3 different situations. You had the sole custody guideline, which covered situations where only one parent had the children for the majority of the time, and the other parent, the parent that had the kids for less time, had the kids for less than 90 24-hour periods in a given calendar year. If you had a situation where both parties had the children for more than 90 24-hour periods in a given calendar year, you had a shared custody situation. And so there was a shared custody guideline. There was also a guideline where the parties each had majority custodial time of at least one child. And in that situation, you would use the split custody guidelines. But what was happening more and more frequently was that judges were faced with situations where you might have a combination of those scenarios. You might have a parent that had sole custody of one child, but the parties shared custody of one child or more than one child. You also had situations where the parties had shared custody, but each of them had a child for a different amount of time. Let's say they had 2 children, and for child number 1, dad had custody for 100 days, but for child number 2, dad had custody for 150 days. So how do you deal with that situation? You could also have a situation where each parent had primary physical custody of at least one child, and then they shared custody of a 3rd or 4th or even 5th child. So those sorts of situations were out there, and you really couldn't calculate with any degree of certainty what the appropriate amount of child support would be. So in the last legislative session, the legislature passed 3 new guidelines that are intended to address those particular situations. You've got the sole shared guideline, which is here under mixed custody. You've got the multiple shared guideline, where you have multiple shared kids, but each party has them for different numbers of days. And then you have the split shared, which is a situation, I'll just click on that, because each guideline sort of tells you where it applies, where parents split custody of 2 or more children and share custody of 1 or more other children. So let's go through each of these. Let's start with the sole shared guideline. We clicked on that on our dashboard, and that brings us to the sole shared mixed custody guideline. And up here, again, it's telling you when to use it. One parent has sole custody of 1 or more children, and both parents share custody of 1 or more children with the same number of days for each child. So how does this work in reality? Well, let's enlarge our screen so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the fields just to get in the habit of doing that. You can see the parties' names, again, defaulted to mother and father. And for our docket number, I'm just going to add in a fake case number. If you have a DCSC matter going, Division of Child Support Enforcement matter going as well, you can also enter the DCSC case number. Now, the first thing we're going to do is figure out the total number of children. So in this particular example, let's assume the parties have 4 children total. I'm going to enter that in. I'm going to enter in each party's monthly gross income. Let's give mom $4,500 per month. Let's give dad $6,700 per month. Is there any spousal support received? Let's say for this example, no. Now, we've entered our basic income information. Let's go down here and make sure we go through the process of going through each of these line items just to make sure that we're not missing anything. If either party had a child from another relationship that was not the subject of this proceeding, that's where we would enter that information. So for example, if dad had 1 child from another relationship, we'd enter that information there. Dad would reduce his income by the sole custody amount that VADER automatically calculates for you there. But again, for purposes of this webinar, we're going to assume that we're only dealing with 4 children total and that neither party has a child from another relationship. Again, any credits for half of any self-employment tax paid out, let's not do that. Let's assume that these are both W-2 employees. We come down to line A9. This tells us each parent's income share. Mom is earning 43.5%, basically, percent of the income. Dad is earning 56.5%. And the basic child support obligation for 4 children under that scenario is $2,112. Now, what VADER will do is it divides that number by the total number of children involved in this particular case. So $2,112 per month divided by 4 is $528 per child, and that will become important later. Now, let's figure out first what the sole child support needs are. And in this particular example, let's assume that mom is primary custodian, sole custodian for 3 of the children. So we're going to make sure that mother is identified as the custodial parent. We're going to state that she has primary custody of 3 of those 4 children. And so for that piece of the puzzle, mom is going to be getting $1,015 per month for 3 children. Now we have to calculate what the support is going to be for that 1 child that the parties share custody of. So we've got 1 child. Now we're going to enter in the number of days that each party has this child. And let's assume for our example that the parties each share roughly equal custody of that 4th child. And you can see that I typed in 183, and it automatically defaults, whatever number you type in here, 182, 183, the other column over here will automatically default to the number that adds up to 365. All right? So we've done that for this one child, and we discover that under that scenario, mother is owed $79 per month for shared custody of that child. We go down to subsection D. Let's assume that dad is paying for health care for all of the children at the rate of $450 per month. And let's assume that for her 3 primary custodial children, mom incurs a daycare expense of $750 per month. That gets factored in. And we go down to subsection E, and this kind of breaks it out for us and tells us who owes what to whom. So for the 3 sole custody children, dad owes mom $1,015.32. For shared custody, dad owes $788. And now in line E3, for that $750 daycare cost, dad owes mom $267.86. You add all those up, it comes to $1,362 that is payable to mom. Now, if you come down to subsection F, you can make adjustments to that guideline amount if you care to. So we've got 2 lines here to make adjustments if you wanted to add to or subtract from that guideline amount. We're not going to enter any adjustments, and you can see here that father's monthly support obligation under that scenario is $1,362 a month to mom. So again, we're looking at a scenario where the parties are sharing custody of 1 child, and mom has primary physical custody of 3 children. Now let's look at a different situation. Let's look at the multiple shared arrangement. All right, and in that situation, you've got multiple shared custodies, meaning that all of the children are shared, but each of them has, or some of them have differing numbers of days. All right, so VADER has kept the information that I entered in the prior worksheet. We've still got 4 children involved. Parents' monthly gross incomes. Mom is at $4,500, dad is at $6,700. Again, we're not going to be dealing with child or spousal support in this example. Again, if there were other biological children or adopted children not subject to this proceeding, we would enter that information here on line A5, but we're not going to do that. Again, self-employment tax, if there was any. Let's go down then to shared child support needs. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what the number of days that each party has each child. So for child number 1 and 2, let's assume that the parties have roughly equal time with child number 1 and 2. For child 3 and 4, let's say that for child 3, dad has child 3 for only 91 days, just enough to throw him into the shared custody guideline. We enter that information. Now let's assume that mom is in a similar situation with child number 4. Let's say that she has child number 4 for 100 days. Dad has the majority of the custodial time. Still, we're over 90 days. We're in the shared guideline for that 4th child. But again, you can see that the number of days that each of the parties has is different. What the guideline does is adds up the total number of days that each parent has for all of the children, and then averages it per child. So with mom having the kids a combined total of 738 days divided by 4, the average number of days mom has the child is 184.5. We've done the same thing for dad. His average number of days is 180.5, and VADER will calculates the percentage share that each party has the children. VADER will give you the support guideline for that scenario. VADER does the math on this for you. So remember that the basic guideline amount in this situation is $3,168.2. So you're going to multiply that number by father's custodial share, and that gets you to $1,566.74. You multiply that same number by mother's custodial share, which gets you $1,601.46, and then you multiply each of these numbers by the party's income share. So again, for mom, her obligation or her need is $1,566.74. You're going to multiply that by her income share of 40.18. That gets you to $629.49. You multiply dad's obligation by his income share, which is 59.82. That gets you to $958. And then you simply subtract the smaller number from the larger number. And in this particular example, the smaller number is mom's share, $629, from the larger number, dad's number of $958, leaving a difference of $329 that's payable to the mother. Now, in terms of work-related daycare, let's assume again that the parties are sharing custody, but let's assume that only the two youngest children require daycare. And let's say that mom puts that bill for the younger two entirely. She pays that directly at $500 per month. Dad is going to owe her an additional $299 for that. So we add that $299 down here to dad's obligation of $328. His total obligation, rounding up, is $628 per month. Now, if you have a case with a Social Security benefit that's paid to the other parent, that can be taken into account down here in subsection E. But again, father's monthly support obligation is $628. Now, if there was any information on this sheet that needed further explanation, let's say that father's monthly income is averaged over a term of years. Let's say that he's a contractor, his income goes up and down from year to year, and in this particular case, I want to note that in this worksheet. I can come down to the notes field, and I can state that father's income is averaged over 3 years. So I just type that in there, I hit the check mark, and you can see that we have that note. And when I go to print out this worksheet, those notes will appear, any notes will appear at the bottom. Father's income is averaged over 3 years. And you can see that this is a two-page worksheet. It is a complex formula. There is a method, there is an order of operation, and in order to show all of those different calculations, it had to fit on two different sheets. Okay, that's the multiple shared scenario. Now our third scenario, again, split shared. Clicked on that. This is where parents are splitting custody of two or more children and share custody of a third or more children. So again, the same information that we had entered in before appears in this worksheet. The gross incomes remain the same. Let's say, again, we've gone through the basic income information already. We've determined that at a combined gross income of $11,200 for 4 children, the basic obligation again is $2,263 divided by 4. We get a per child support amount of $565.75. We're going to apply that in the calculations below. So for split custody support, let's assume that mom has 1 child primarily and father has 1 child primarily. VADER calculates that the amount that dad owes to mom because of his higher income is $111 per month. So we've dispensed with the calculation for 2 of the children. And again, in that scenario, mom has 1, she has sole custody of 1, and dad has sole custody of 1. Now what do we do with the other 2 that the parties are sharing custody of? Well, we have to account for those 2 remaining children. And again, we have to tell VADER how many days does each party have those shared children. Now, in this particular example, we can't really calculate a scenario where mom and dad share the children, but for different days. That's a hole in the statute. We may get to a point where the legislature addresses that, but for now, we're going to assume that for those final 2 children, mom and dad are sharing custody of both those children in the same number, meaning that in this scenario, let's assume that mom has the the shared children for 200 days, both of them, and dad has them for 165 days. VADER calculates that under this scenario, dad would owe mom $232 per month for those shared children. So, again, we're looking also to add in any health care or work-related daycare. We said let's assume that dad is paying for all 4 children at $450 a month, and let's assume that mom is making direct payments of daycare expenses at $750 per month. VADER will calculate how those numbers factor in. Under this scenario, mom is going to be owed $268 for the daycare after factoring in the health care expenses. That number, $267.86, gets added to dad's support obligation above for the shared custody support. And it all comes down to dad owing mom a total of $611, even though he has 1 child, sole custody of 1 child, mom has sole custody of 1 child, and they share custody of the 2 other children. Again, you've got your notes feature if you need to make any notes on any of the calculations. And when you print out this particular worksheet, again, a fairly complex worksheet, you've got a 2-pager. All right, so that's how you calculate the mixed custody guidelines. Again, you've got sole and shared, multiple shared, and split shared.